what I'm asking people, which is to be real with me, is actually a
Hmm.
huge ask. And I think that
Hmm.
I think there's a real risk in asking anyone to generally be honest, genuinely be honest. And I think that to dismiss that risk is really, especially in this moment and on the internet, is
Hmm.
stupid. So, but it like means a lot to me. So thanks for trusting me.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for asking me. And I loved Little Scream so much. I thought it was so
Thanks.
beautiful. And like when I saw it, I was like, yeah. I was like, yeah, 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 there's something in there. There's something, whether Little Scream ever happens again or not is not the point. It's like I saw something happening. There was some process, there was some like spark of whatever was there. And like I thought it was thrilling to see somebody, you know, work to create a container for whatever that spark was or is. Um,
I met you because you did a performance. You do a performance
mhm,
that takes place in your house.
mhm.
A portion of it, one of the early chapters in a performance that consists of many chapters, let's say. The first part was something you ran for several years
Do you mean
out
the
of your
first
house?
part in my
The
in my
Odyssey. Yeah,
yeah,
in your
yeah, in my
house.
house?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean basically from 2022 to now, and this month I'm about to send out all the things to say that this is the last bit. So yeah, for just almost 2.5 years.
Yeah. So you run, I'm not going to explain your piece, but it's book one of the Odyssey. You do it in your way, in your house,
Hmm.
to an audience of 2 to 3 people,
Hmm.
in Queens.
Hmm.
And that was an opportunity to see like a mysterious production in someone's basement, that someone had said next to me at a party, and I just overheard it and said, "What?" And they said, "Yeah, you put you on a secret list." And then I was on the list, and that's how I ended up in your basement, or no, in your apartment, which is a basement apartment-ish.
Hmm.
And I think that part of the appeal was that I could get murdered in my head, and that there was like a risk factor involved.
Uh-huh.
And then when I got there, it was, I think, one of the most unique um experiences of my life, because it was so intimate and so personal, and at the same time entirely inaccessible because it was in ancient Greek.
Hmm.
And um I felt like I was getting to know you, and then also you were like slipping through the cracks, and I was also relearning about the Odyssey. So it
Hmm.
was like a deeply personal work, and also not. And also I was in your house, and also it was in ancient Greek. Um, so I don't know what my real clear point was, but it is that your work is so like intimate and personal, and then also at the same time not.
Hmm.
And I think that you are like in there as yourself so much, but then
Hmm.
also like my desire is always to like get to the meat of who somebody is and like really grasp it and kind of hold on to it and understand it.
Got
Um,
it.
that's okay. And
Hmm.
I feel like with you, I did that, but in a feeling way. Like I'm not explaining super clearly, but there's just something so deeply like personal and impersonal about your work. Um, And yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's also just like in ancient Greek. And you're telling like these classic tales. But it's in your house. Do you want to tackle a billion things I just threw at you?
Yeah, I mean, I think uh so you've also seen the solo piece that I do in my work studio, which
Yeah.
predates the Odyssey stuff,
Yeah.
and really that was the like um proof of concept, I didn't even know that it was a proof of concept for something, but it, is sort of where I learned some
The
of
study.
yeah, yeah, which is yeah, that sort of became whatever this thing is in my
Okay,
house.
that makes sense.
But I know that one of my early goals, or at least thoughts around creating that performance, and I think this is still true, um, where I really want to shy away as much as possible from telling people what they're supposed to think about something,
Hmm.
or what they're supposed to feel. I have an aversion to like Disney films in the way that it's like this is all clearly being they're pulling the levers and pushing the buttons to be like and have this emotional reaction here and have
Yeah.
this emotional reaction here,
Hmm.
which you know is part of dramaturgy and part of writing and a lot of
Yeah.
it's not necessarily bad. um I think it can be, but it's not necessarily. And I kind of always want to move in a direction where it's like, can I present something that will make people feel something and do something, but in such a way that it's like, I always want people to leave thinking like, I have no idea what I'm supposed to think about that.
Hmm.
I think something about it, and I had some experience, but I'm not actually sure what the purpose of that was.
Hmm.
Um, and and to the point of, because also it's like I don't want people to be involved in my personal story. I want to use
Hmm.
my personal feelings and my personal experiences to um, charge an atmosphere so that people can go away and like uh, sort of unwind and unravel whatever's happening inside of them. Because I also think, sorry, now just gonna ramble.
Yeah, this is great.
You know, because it's like, what is the point of the humanities? In literature and stories, that it's like, people fight over, two lines of, say the Odyssey, about its meaning or what the right answer is to some passage. And it's like, well, I can read the same passage, and if I read it at one point, it means one thing to me, and if I read it at another point, it means another thing to me. And e- because of that fact, it's like, well, maybe the piece of literature and the piece of writing, the piece of humanity doesn't doesn't actually mean anything fully in and of itself, and that the final meaning is only through my interaction with it. And it's actually a point of relationship and a point of like contemplation. And if I'm in that feedback loop with myself and the piece of text, then I can like see things about myself. I can see things about the text, and I can see things about myself, and I can like and I can start to explore and examine and unravel and see lots of different things about it. And I don't want people to become involved with my personal story in connection to the text.
Hmm.
That I want to use that to open up space for people to start seeing the characters in the story in such a way that will make them feel ignited about their own selves.
Hmm.
That's something I say at the beginning in the first slideshow about, it's okay if your mind wanders. Excuse me. And if your mind does wander, uh, take note of what you're thinking about, basically, because it's like that's an interesting, data point about well, when I'm bored, or
Yourself.
if I start to go away, where do I land first? And it's just a piece of information. And even if it's something completely mundane and unimportant, like something like, oh gosh, I need to pick this up from the store, that's still an interesting piece of information. And also I would challenge as to whether that's mundane or unimportant anyway. Because if you're going to the store, which is where you get food and food and having yourself making sure that you can subsist, is that the right word that I want? um
Yeah.
is important. So anyway, you know what I mean, it's just so yes, I agree. It is, I think I do want to walk that line of like being very personal and intimate, but also uh inscrutable and hidden behind something. Because here's another thing. Can I say another thing?
My God.
um nobody even knows who Homer is or was, or if
Hmm.
Homer is or was.
Yeah.
And I would not bet on the fact that the poems were written by one person.
Hmm.
In fact, we probably basically know that like they were written over centuries by multiple oral poets who improvised and elaborated on traditional material. And so even if it was one person who wrote them down as we have them now, which maybe, um, that's at least a possibility. Even if that is the truth, the material and the details of all the material, there's no way that that all came from one person. And so there is no identity. And so even though it feels like there's an identity and there is definitely a character to the poems that is very Homeric, uh, and different from, if you're reading Hesiod, even though it's the same Homeric dialect, it's still a different Homeric. The character of the poetry is different. I think. I don't know a lot of Hesiod. I've only read a little bit.
Hmm.
So I can't fully talk. Can't talk fully about that, or at least in details. But so there is a character there, but the identity of that character is unknown and
Hmm.
unknowable. And so I hope that I am entering in that space too of like, well, that I'm there and my fingerprints are all over it,
Yeah.
and yet I'm still unknown and unknowable ultimately. Um,
Hmm.
and the poems exist right at the curtain of history, you know.
Hmm.
Of like if you go further back, you start to lose the historical record. I mean, you move forward from where we have them, and like there's a lot of record, then there's a lot of writing. Because in fact, the reason why we even have the poems is because we think, it's the Phoenician alphabet was adopted by the Greeks, and because they could write it down, which is the thing that makes history, is the fact that
Hmm.
they write them and write down these details. Um, that's the reason why we even have the poems in as complete a form as we have them. So it really does like sit right, yeah, right at the curtain of the mist of history and knowing. So I don't know. I guess it comes from the way that I work, which is like I read a lot of things and I like look at whatever. I read things that I find interesting or do whatever. And with the Odyssey in particular, it's like I just read the text a lot. I have to look up words and and there's a lot of just like detail, just sort of reading of different kinds. And then there's there's a space where I'm not thinking about it, and then somewhere over here ideas come up and just sort of images arise, and then I just create those images in space.
Hmm.
I don't really think about what those images mean or why they might be
Hmm.
relevant to the project. It's just like, oh, like the song I sing at the end of book one. I had heard that song in a Thai restaurant while I was having lunch one day because I love Thai food. And I was just like, what a weird song. I've never heard that song before. It's clearly from the 50s or 60s. It's clearly old, but I've not heard it as like
Yeah.
a regular oldie. And looked it up and found it and was like, gosh, this song is great. And then 2 years later, when I was actually building book one, it was like, oh, I should sing that song at the end of book one. And I had that little toy piano that I had also just like bought a long time ago because before I was doing book one, because I was like, oh, I want a toy piano for some reason. And because it's one of the few instruments that I can not play, but pretend to, understand and play.
Hmm.
And it was just like, okay, well, I'll sing that song and then, oh, I'll make an arrangement on this piano. And it wasn't until I was like doing it that it started to have ideas about why it would be relevant or
Hmm.
what it might mean. And it also continues to change, and I continue to think different things about what it might mean and why it might be relevant. I had a point to all of this. Um,
How you work.
yeah. Well, I was trying to get to like the
Yeah.
idea of intimacy and like
Yeah.
why it feels intimate. Um, I guess because it's like it's in a space of relationship with what I'm doing with the text and unmediating my response to it in some way by
Mm.
having it come out through just images and ideas and trusting those images and ideas. And if it feels like they are, uh, if it feels like they move me in some way internally, then then I do it. And if it feels
Mm.
dead internally, then I try to find a different, then I wait until a new image comes or it adjusts itself. And I guess, and I wonder if, because that's my relationship to the text, that is also part of what's building the relationship with the audience, and
Mm.
that I'm inviting them into that process, maybe. And so, because it feels unmediated in that way, maybe that is why people feel the intimacy and feel the closeness to me and the project and the performance. Um, but then what does that mean in terms of then my relationship? I have relationship to text and then text to me and then me to audience. And maybe that's the relationship that I'm thinking more about now is like, well, what is my relationship to the audience? And mm, what are we doing now that we've taken this text and we've processed it in a certain way, and now we're creating a community around the processing of this text. And what does that mean? And how does that bring us close together? And how does that uh, illuminate how we might be different and further apart? Or are we? Or does it? Or, I don't know. I don't know. That was a lot of just rambling.
No, I think it kind of clarified in some ways what you were saying at the beginning, and you'll go with me. I think what's kind of interesting about how you were saying that you want to leave people wondering what the point was, right? Wondering what the point was, sort of like making their own meaning of what they just experienced. Um, and that's inevitable when your own process is you having an unfamiliar relationship
Hmm.
with the text and the images that are coming up, which is was very obvious to me in the study, which felt like I was entering your unconscious, kind of.
Mhm. Yeah.
And I was just like, things were popping up, and I was like, oh, I'm in Joseph's unconscious in his office. And I
Uh,
think if what you're creating is like in some way is a projection of that, and with the Odyssey it's like through the Odyssey, so
mhm,
it's like Joseph via the Odyssey, but
mhm,
we are experiencing that more like experimental meaning making. So it's like we're entering like the unknown with you,
mm, mhm.
and then it just becomes a larger unknown because then we're in there too, kind of. Does that make sense? That makes sense to
Yeah.
me
Yeah, I
from
think
what you
so.
said.
I think so. I'm gonna throw something else into the pot in the last
Yeah.
6 minutes and 49 seconds that we
And I
have.
have one other question, so we might have to reclaim because
Oh,
I have a final thing that we have to go to, but let's continue with this.
okay, okay. Um, so the other thing about Odysseus is that he's somewhat famous for in the Iliad there's the famous thing that Achilles says to him that's like and I don't know the quote because I don't know the Iliad as well. Um, where he says like, I hate the man who says one thing but thinks another in his heart.
Mhm.
And so with Odysseus in particular, because he's known as someone who is tricky and clever and perhaps lying and not always telling the truth, and so always this uh unstraightforwardness about that character.
Mhm.
Um, I think I'm gonna make like a broad sweeping statement. So, here,
Mhm. Love
get
it.
ready. I guess it's like for as much as I want to be straightforward or honest or forthright or whatever, to whatever degree I want to be that,
Mhm.
um, I still look at myself and think, is that really who I am? Or I do things, I'm like, wow, did I really do that or say that? Or even in a current moment, it's like, wait, what am I doing and who am I and what do I actually think and care about?
Mhm.
And in what ways are my behaviors showing me things that I didn't know that I thought or felt? and how are my behaviors not matching things that I think that I think and feel.
Mhm.
Um, and I guess in the way that like I continue to be a mystery to myself. I think that maybe all of us are mysteries to ourselves, or maybe not. I mean, some people are really clear about themselves, and I think that's a useful framing as a character who's not even shown up in my performances yet,
Yeah,
really.
yeah,
But because he sits at the center of the poem, it's like uh, I think that I think that's I think that's a large part of like what is making this whole thing function and is both opening up the space for intimacy, but also keeping things unclear and unknown, I think.
yeah, yeah. I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think from a personal place, I mean, Little Scream was basically, I had no idea how to describe that piece. I mean, I still don't really, but if anything, I would just say that, it's a piece sort of like created by um a part of me, and they
Hmm.
just made a thing and they had to say something and it
Uh-huh.
was that. And so like that's uh, it's very frustrating because I think that I as like a maker, I want to be able to like have some kind of control over my future and who I am. And I feel like what I actually end up doing is always just like something that some part of me has to do. And like I never really even understand why they're doing it until later. And then I'm like, oh, look what that had to figure that out. But
Uh-huh.
like it just in terms of like clarity and control over who's doing what and why, I struggle with it. Or that's the machine that makes the work,
Hmm. Yeah,
if
I think
that.
so. Yeah, I mean, I uh totally identify with that and understand that. And like, yeah, not a lot of questions asked at the beginning. It's like there's something that's acting and behaving, and my job is to like be the hands and eyes and like, be the body for it.
Like I know when people are in the arts that they want to be somebody and they want to make their art and they want to get paid and they want to be in the world, and I'm just always interested in like what that trajectory is and why choices were made.
Yeah. Excuse me again. Uh yeah, I mean, look, like I've been doing theater since I was 6 years old.
Yeah.
Community theater and then doing professional theater since I was 11. And when I was younger, I can look back now and like see a little bit more clearly like what was going on. And even before I started that, I was like dancing around the house and was sort of, drawn to like my sister's recitals and like their like magic wands that they had for their, ballet, 4-year-old ballet number. And and I think about it now and it's like I made a set model diorama for like I was the one who wanted to get like the scripts, at the Scholastic Book Club. It's like, well, I didn't
Hmm.
buy James and the Giant Peach and Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. I bought the script versions of
Oh,
the
really?
script adaptations of James and the Giant Peach and Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. And so I like made I set designed the whole production of James and the Giant Peach, and like some of it was pretty
Pretty
good
good. I'm sure.
for
I'm sure.
for an
I'm sure it
8-year-old
was.
in a in a cardboard box.
Mhm.
And uh I would like sit in my room in the dark and I would use the yellow flashlight that's over on my shelf over there that appears in book one. um I was like fascinated with just sitting in the dark and like turning on the flashlight and illuminating objects with a flashlight. Like that was interesting to me, which I think
Not at
about it
all
now, it's like,
surprising when I see you
yeah,
with
and it's
your
like,
works.
oh, well, I just was like, I think that for whatever reason, like the vocabulary of the theatrical of like of sitting in a box in the dark and controlling the light and the environment,
Mhm.
like and the movement and space is like I think has just been something that I love and have loved and has sort of like, has like hit my brain in a way for my whole life. I certainly started as a performer, so I thought like, oh, what I really want is to be a performer and to sing and dance and act and stuff. And as I went through the trajectory of doing musical theater because I liked doing all of it, it became clear that like, yes, I love performing, but I have a different interest in like making theater and being more in charge of like shaping the whole experience, which is where the studio came in.
Mm,
And that was like an experiment in like I was just having a really hard time. I had been doing a show out of town and was having I was having difficulties in a lot of different ways. And that experience out of town was not good and I felt like I was not I felt like I didn't have a real outlet for whatever was like pent up inside of me, which I could not and was not able to articulate. And even now, like I can maybe articulate it a little bit, but I don't know how much I can actually articulate it.
yeah.
And, so I got that studio. I mean, I was away, I like lost 30 pounds because my stomach started hurting. And like, again, nothing was ever diagnosed. Who knows what it was?
Yeah.
And I was just clearly in some sort of crisis. And I got that studio, and it was like people would say, "What are you doing? What are you doing with the studio?" And I would say, "I don't know. I don't know. I have lots of books. I'll build some bookcases and I'll move my books in and I'm just going to use it to read and work and whatever." And once I was in the space and was making the bookcases that I have, I had the ideas of like, oh, well, I'm going to make a solo performance in here that I'll do for a few people. And the only thing that the only guiding thing in my head, maybe I'm saying too much. The only guiding thing in my head was uh and I want it to be terrifying.
Mm,
But
hmm.
not like jump scares and not like,
Yeah.
not like
Like,
monsters and jump scares, but I just wanted it to be like uh terrifying in its intensity and sort of in its
hmm.
emotional intensity and sort of in its like just in the tension of it. I love quiet. I love quiet horror. I love using
Mm,
silence and seeing how long you can use silence because the longer you draw out the silence, the more impactful that little that little sound might be. And similarly, visually, it's like, well, if you take away visual stimulation, then like just little things can become really impactful,
mhm.
which I think is easier to do. I think you can do that in film, but it's a different thing to do that in
Absolutely.
in physical space, and I think you can do it in a different way.
Yeah.
Um, and y-
And there's a part of the study which is quite terrifying. Where we're left alone. I think it's where we're left alone. And that was the
uh-huh.
only part. And I had obviously survived previous theater experiences with you. So I wasn't really afraid for my life, but there's a part where we're left alone and there's a part where we're
hmm
in the complete darkness together. And I was
hmm
like, I don't know who the fuck this guy is. Like this
hmm
is actually a little, and the existential kind of, yeah, actually not existential, just literally embodied fear.
hmm
It's fun.
Well, oh my gosh. Okay, well, that brings up like a whole different
Yeah.
branch of like what it means uh to build trust
Mm,
from a performer's point of view. And I've always felt like the experience is my responsibility, and so it's my responsibility to do everything I can to signal everything that the audience needs to have or needs to signal everything that the audience needs to know without making it clear what I'm signaling so that they can still be surprised but also feel um to feel safe in feeling unsafe or
mm,
feeling afraid or feeling unsure. That's another big thing. And there are lots of different ways that is built for sure.
mhm.
but that is beside the point at this moment. Anyway, so as I was building the stuff but that has something to do with the intimacy, I think, and the
Hmm.
audience that we were talking
Yeah.
about earlier.
Yeah.
Um, but there was a moment as I was building that performance in my studio where like I remembered sitting in the dark with my flashlight, and I remembered like building little plays and like turning on the lights, turning on the different hallway lights and things in our entryway and in our house so that it would look a certain way, and like building light cues with what was there. Um, and it's like I think a lot of performers, they reach 30 in their mid 30s, and I'm 40 now.
Me too.
And oh my gosh.
I'm turning 40 in January. I'm almost
Okay,
40.
wonderful. Well, okay, well, I'm 7 months ahead of you.
Okay. We're the same. Same.
Same. And there's like career transitions for dancers, and there's, and people, they leave the business and they change, they career transition, and the 30s is where a lot of that happens. And I had an experience where um I was doing a show that was difficult for a lot of reasons, and it was a big commercial production, and it closed pretty early, in a very short run. And I did get a moment on the day that we closed to stand on the stage, and nobody else was on stage or in the theater. And it only lasted for, a minute or so. And I remember standing on the stage and looking into the audience, and like having this like really deep feeling of feeling like being on stage is where I feel the most at home and the most comfortable. And really like that word home was just so clear in my mind, and that I feel that way more on stage than I do in my living spaces, or ever have in my living spaces. And I mean, there's a lot more that we could probably psychoanalyze about that, but but it definitely goes back to sort of my younger childhood just feelings about theater, and my interest in theater and theater making, and the dark box, the diorama that theater gets done in. And yeah, even though I went down a very, very specific path, from my childhood experiences and everything that happened there. Um, uh, it looks different now, but it's still, I feel like that was a little bit of a diversion, and now I've found like, well, what
Yeah.
I was really wanting to do, and what really felt, to use a word that, I really don't know what it means, that feels
Perfect.
authentic, or just feels like really uh specifically me, I
Hmm.
guess. And yeah. I know. That's so funny. I wonder what picture you found. Did you find an old headshot? Is that what it
Yeah,
was?
I found three headshots of you, and I was
Yeah.
like, "Oh my God, this is Joseph through the years." There was
Uh-huh.
baby Joseph,
Uh-huh.
teenager, or maybe in your
Uh-huh.
20s Joseph, and then now
Uh-huh.
Joseph. But I also had no idea how old you were. In my mind, you could
Uh-huh.
be early 30s, late 20s. Like I don't know age. I can't, it's a problem
Sure,
actually.
sure. But yeah, it's weird though. Like, yeah, especially as I hit middle age and like think about this thing that I've been doing for now 34 years of my 40 years on the planet. And it's like, wow, that's kind of crazy. And I obviously have a lot of feelings about it. And also, like, I also haven't figured it out. I haven't figured
Mhm.
out how to I had figured out like how I could have lived my life doing what I had been doing as a young adult in my 20s. And, I could have stayed doing that, but I really didn't want to. And so now I've created this other thing, and have spent a lot of time and energy and resources on this other thing. And now I've sort of started to really uh I feel like I always say this though. I feel like I'm always saying I'm just starting to finally understand
Yeah,
something.
yeah, yeah,
I mean,
same. Yeah.
but that's also the exciting thing is that there's always something else to understand and there's always something else to like to land on and another
Hmm.
realization. And so as those things keep happening, it's like, well, I just have to like keep doing this thing, but I also haven't figured out how to make it actually work
Hmm.
or how to be sustainable or actually take care of myself while I'm doing it, which, I don't know, I feel like probably a lot of artists can identify with that struggle.
Yeah. I think obviously there's like a lot of questions to answer on sort of like the path of sustainability, but
Uh-huh.
I think just my positive button to this
Great too. I can't wait.
is that I'm grateful, and hopefully you're grateful that, whatever, because I mean, this is me projecting onto you, like that some voice inside of you, theater guy, you're along your path, and there was like some part of you that listened to yourself in order to like pivot or and not change
Mhm.
course, but like maintain your like most honest course as an artist and as a maker.
Mhm.
And I think that that's really something that's difficult because the questions of like how to survive on that path are really hard, and none of us seem to have the answers yet, but it's like that's survival. I guess that's why I'm doing this thing too. Like I think that that's your, at least your like creative spirit surviving or something. Like that's really cool.
Yeah, but also, I mean, so I read your last email about the like there women who are not
Hmm.
self-actualized, was that the
Hmm.
word?
Hmm.
And
Actually, I think I said failed, but yeah.
you did say failed, but then you defined failed by saying
Hmm.
what failed means is like not having the space, whatever it is, to self-actualize.
Yeah.
And you know, I have to acknowledge that like part of the reason I was able to do the things that I did is because I got lucky with a job, right? Where I started getting residuals from that job. And if I hadn't have gotten that job with those residuals at that time, how could I have made the decisions that I wanted to make?
Hmm.
And how could I have taken the risks? How could I have afforded that work studio to give myself the playground
Hmm.
to figure out what I needed to figure out? And it has to be acknowledged that there is a huge element of luck and of
Huge.
falling into something
Yeah.
that created conditions where I could do that. And if that hadn't have happened, like I don't know. I don't know. And I feel like I'm hitting the point now where it's like I need something like that to happen again because it's
Yeah.
not working
Hmm.
anymore. And it's like, ugh, I guess those things don't just like always magically happen to like help you along your path. Um,
Yeah.
I don't know, but I feel like that has to be said
Yeah.
because I also feel at the moment, if not to be too maybe I'm being too honest, I don't know. But I don't know, you make me feel like I want to be honest. It's your fault. It's your fault if
It
I say
is. I'll
I don't
take
want
it.
to say. No, no, no.
Yeah.
That's a good way to shirk responsibility for
Yeah.
one
Just
actually.
blame me.
Yeah, that's great. Um, but in order to keep but I guess this is why I say it is that it can't be taken for granted that the like the creative spirit and that like that artistic spirit, whatever that is just gonna stay alive.
Mm-mm.
Because if it doesn't, if it's not being taken care of on like
Hmm.
the real ways that just a person needs to be taken care of, then it can't thrive and
Hmm.
it won't survive. And I feel often in my current state after a pandemic and after, a lot of other things, it's like I am feeling tired. I am feeling not like I feel creative and not like I feel accomplished and not like I feel like I have the esprit to like keep it going. You know,
Mm,
that that's a harder thing to access as I get older and as like responsibilities pile up and as like other things pile up, you know. Um, but maybe that's, you know, but maybe that's I don't know, maybe I can use that as the next part of the journey to say like, well, this is maybe that's a different kind of growing up and a different kind of um adult becoming. I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. Maybe I just think of those things in this way because I can, and maybe it'll help me figure it out, even if that's not, there's no ultimate truth to that.
I don't, I mean, the aging artist is like a whole thing unto itself. I mean,
Uh-huh.
I don't have any answers. I'm just deeply invested in the same questions.
Hmm. Well, I mean, I don't think there are any answers. I mean, that's the thing
Mhm.
that they always say, you know, in show business, it's like, well, there are 8,000 different ways to make it work and to
Yeah,
be
yeah.
successful and to, you know, break in or whatever. And, but I like this conversation around even if we don't use the words failed or self-actualization,
Mhm.
whatever, I don't
Yeah,
know, like, I don't know what the right like actual vocabulary
yeah,
is,
yeah.
but there is something around, you know, I used the word authenticity
Mhm.
earlier. It's like those words like are circling around this thing, and it does relate to right, the desire to be creative.
Mhm.
It's like expression is, I don't know, sorry, wait, I just like totally derailed myself. But I think that the conversation around those things is important
Mhm.
because, okay, here's another thought.
Yeah.
Um, one of the things that I wanted, one of the original ideas of this project was that like, you know, that I would do a 24-hour performance of
Mhm.
thing of the whole poem, which is still a part of the idea, but that it would be a part of like a week-long carnival symposium, like whatever it would
Yeah.
be, and the 24-hour thing would happen like on, I guess that would be like the fourth 24 hours, you know, like
Mhm.
the middle of the thing. But around that there would be other solo performances, but not just that, it would be people who there's one friend in particular who's a music director, or I met her as a music director, but she's also a musician and has a band with her husband. And she is extraordinary in many, many ways. And she also like at a certain point like got this horse and like loved this horse and like was very very involved in like you know having this horse and going and riding this horse and taking care of this horse and like and it was so amazing to see how she like came alive when she talked about her experiences with the horse.
Mhm.
Mm, Lady is I think her name was her name. And uh And what it was like, oh, so then there would be people like presenting on just like their hobbies and the things that just like make them like come alive and
Yeah.
make them feel like they are themselves and make them
Yeah.
feel even if you can't articulate what it is that makes you feel like yourself, but you just
Mhm.
feel you have that feeling of like being in your body and being involved in something that like lights you up.
Mhm.
And I guess that's another just aim of the whole thing is like, well, I started teaching myself ancient Greek because I just thought it was really interesting.
Yeah.
I had no intention of making it a project. I had no intention of going into academia. I didn't even have any intentions of like what texts I wanted to read. Um, Maybe the symposium was the first on that list, but like other than that, it was just like I love grammar, I love language,
Yeah.
I loved the Greek alphabet, I loved learning a new script, I loved just all of those things. And it's so easy to lose sight of like those moments when you're just involved in the thing that makes you feel alive and like electrified and on fire or engaged or calm or you know whatever however you want to describe it.
Mhm.
And I don't know, maybe I don't know, how do we create conditions for people to feel that way? Maybe I'll leave you with this thought.
Yeah.
And
Take it.
maybe and look, I don't know, I could be full of shit. So
For sure. We're all full of shit. It's
Always
fine.
okay, great, yeah. Yeah, maybe we're all just
We are. Absolutely.
full of shit.
Hmm.
But you know, I hate asking people for money for my project.
Yeah.
I hate selling my project. I hate like there's something about that that I really hate. And you know, I have lots of different ideas and thoughts and can say psychoanalyze myself about why that might be. Um, but it is a real conundrum of like, well, okay, but if this is what you want to do, then you have to find a way to still be able to live. And, you know, it was easier when there were some nice residuals coming in on a regular basis for a long time, and you could sort of pretend like you didn't have to figure that out because something was, you got lucky. Um, and now that that particular form of luck is not there, it's like, well, you still have to do that. You still have to do something. And, you know, yeah, so what does that mean to professionalize or like officially say that like this is the thing that I am doing?
Hmm.
And is that what I want? Is that the only way to scale the thing that I want to scale? But even now I'm using, you know, business words about scaling a project and scaling a, you know,
Hmm.
an endeavor. Um, I don't know. I really don't know. I wish I did. It would make my
Me
life a
too.
lot easier.
I really do
Um,
too.
but yeah, there are just so many different there's so many different facets of that conversation and like so many different cultural assumptions and cultural values embedded in that. There are a lot of like artistic values of like
Hmm.
the starving artist and like
Hmm.
all of that stuff. There's that to contend with. There's also the like the fight of like, yes, but artists must get paid for what they do. And then it's like, okay, but also if you're performing live, then there are only so many people who can be there, and how much money can you actually
Hmm.
ask people to pay for a thing? And then that turns into like, well, but it's important. And it's like, okay, well, why is it important and what is its value? And then you're, you know, writing essays about, you know, the validity and importance of art and
And
of
val
what
yeah.
you're doing. And then you have to like come up with value statements and like which is good, but can also like lead away from the thing that you're
Yeah.
doing. And
And
like
draining.
it just like you know,
Hmm.
there's all these things that are
That's it.
happening. That's how I feel. I'm just like in the washing
Yeah.
machine, just spinning around. And really, it's like all I fucking want to do is read the Odyssey and
Hmm.
have these images appear, which is like the most exciting thing to like have this thing just like appear in my head and like come out of the darkness in my head, and then to like put it into my hands and into objects, and then to put that into space and into my voice and into everything, and then to share that with people and to enter that performative character space that we've only ever seen each other in.
Yeah.
Um, and to be in relationship with an audience and to be sharing that with them and to feel the thing that happens between us, like that's literally all I care about. It is the only thing I care about,
Hmm.
for better and for worse.
I know.
And it's like I feel like I have to do it because now I've built a life and I've understood my life from childhood of like being involved in theater and everything that it does to my brain and this feeling of home and this feeling of fulfillment and this feeling of being on fire and feeling of being the most myself. And it's like, well, if I don't have a way to be involved in that process, then I don't like that. That feels scary to
Hmm.
me.
Yeah.
And yeah, that just feels horrifying. So what am I supposed to do? Rhetorical question. Unless you have a real answer.
I don't. I don't. But this is all I ever wanted to talk about. So I'm just so happy. And
Mm.
just thank you so much. I mean, I'm doing this because it doesn't cost me any money. I truly was like, I need to do something that doesn't cost me any money
Uh-huh.
and gets me out there, and I don't need to ask anybody for anything.
Yeah.
Here we
Yeah.
are.
Well, you asked me for something.
I did. I did. And those are the kind of asks that put me into relationship with people that I want to be in relationship with. So that
Uh,
was a bonus for me.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And I guess for me, it's like, well, there's the ungenerous read, which is like, well, what actor or artist doesn't like talking about themselves? But that's the ungenerous read on it. But also, like I just said, like if I if I can do anything that keeps me involved with doing the thing that I just articulated that means the
Hmm.
most to me, um, then yeah, I'll talk about it because the only thing that I've that has been like floating around in my head is like I think that if there is a way towards sustainability for people to be able to be in the space of of uh being lit up by whatever they're making, um if there's a way to do that, there I think it'll only happen if there is a community around it.
Hmm.
And I don't know what that looks like or how that would make it more sustainable and supportive for more people. Um, but it feels like that's the only real way that it'll happen, which is wonderful and sad as a solo performer where,
Yeah.
I think all I want to do is work alone, but that's actually not really the deal anyway.
Yeah. But you're alone together. Alone together.
Alone together. Alone together. We do love that.
That's the human condition, baby.
ABI, yes, no, made it there. We made it there. We made it to the human